Okay, so welcome back to video number 3. All right, so again, just to recap, you're going through your worksheet. Whoops. And you're going to fill in here which amendment these quotes are from, or which act, which is the law. As I go through this, you can pause the video and look at each one and see what we can come up with. We'll do the answers at the end of this video, hopefully, if we have time. Again, 13th, 14th, 15th, 19th, 24th, and 26th Amendment. And you're going to match it to what picture there. So follow along with your worksheets, and we'll get back to this. We're doing amendments somewhere. There we go. So here we go. The 15th Amendment. Let's backtrack here. We'll just go ahead and go through them real quick. The Bill of Rights is the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. It secures people's rights. An amendment is something you add to the Constitution. If you're going to change the Constitution, you're not going to go at it with an eraser. You're going to go at it with an ink pen. So you're going to add to it. That's how we change our Constitution. So we add amendments, and there's a process for that. We'll go through that when we go through the another unit. There were Civil War amendments. There was stuff added to our Constitution after the Civil War. The Civil War is a war fought in the United States between 1865 and 1870, and it was largely about slavery. Do we want to be a nation that has slavery, or do we want to be a nation that that is free and every person is granted equal rights under the Constitution? 13th Amendment abolished slavery. After the Civil War, the North won the Union, and therefore slavery was abolished and no longer legal. So it says, the 13th Amendment, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude. Involuntary servitude. That's somebody that's not volunteering their service. They're being forced to serve. That's slavery. Except as punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted. Prison is not slavery. You can't, murder somebody and then say, you're enslaving me. No, you're in prison. So it's not talking about that. So that's what the 13th Amendment says. So if you want to go to your worksheet, make sure you find 13th Amendment, which one of these it is. And then you need to go down here and which one is a quote from the 13th Amendment. If you need to pause this video, you do that. Okay, so we got the 13th Amendment. Now we're to the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment, of course, is our Citizenship Amendment. It's the amendment that just defines citizenship for us. It was something added to our amendment. So we had immediately before that was the 13th Amendment abolishing slavery. 14th Amendment actually defined citizenship. And this is what it says. All persons born or naturalized in the United States are subject to the jurisdiction thereof, are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. So not only are you now a citizen if you're born in the U.S., or one or both of your parents are citizens. So you can either be a born citizen. If you're not a born citizen, you have to what? If you want to be a citizen. That's right, become naturalized. So any person born or naturalized in the U.S. is a citizen. The 14th Amendment defines that for us. So it also has a lot to do about with African Americans. 13th Amendment freed slaves. It no longer slave allowed, but in the States they were still treating African Americans like slaves. Like, okay, well, we can't force you to work on a plantation, but then what? But the attitude there was, well, we can't force African Americans to work on a plantation anymore, but we could at least make them as little as possible, or we can treat them as poorly as possible. So then the 14th Amendment happened and said, nope, African Americans have as equal citizenship as white people do. So not only are African Americans freed, but now they're equal in citizenship status as that with the white people. Some states, that did not go over very well. So the states did not particularly like this amendment. But it was the law. And so by federal law, those states had to give equal citizenship to African Americans. So just to ensure that, that it defined slavery, it talked about natural, this amendment, this is where we get the naturalization, born citizenship. Um, and then let's go on. Let's skip that one. Okay, so the 14th Amendment is this equal protection under the law. Okay, so this 14th Amendment also states this in 1868, equal protection under the law. So not only are African Americans equal in citizenship to white people, but also they have equal rights. And that means that they have equal protection of those rights as white people do. And this was another thing really hard for the states to accept. I mean, so quick after the southern states lost the Civil War, they no longer could, they had to release their slaves. And now, somebody that used to be their slave is now their equal in citizenship. And some of the states were still not protecting them, not looking at them as equal, not obeying that federal law. So that's when we had to, the United States came in with this 15th Amendment of 1870, where then African American men, just the men, received the right to vote. So remember the 13th Amendment, let's go back. 13th Amendment abolished slavery. It made it illegal. 14th Amendment defined citizenship. And then the 15th Amendment granted voting rights to African American men. Do you see how it just continues to, these amendments continue to add to the rights of the African Americans that were being really just condemned and really persecuted against. Now, the women didn't get to vote until the 19th Amendment. The 19th Amendment is where women got to vote. This was called suffrage. Suffrage. It's a very important term we're going to talk about all year. Suffrage. Women's right to vote is called suffrage. The 19th Amendment gave all women, African American and white women, the right to vote. Because, let's face it, after the 15th Amendment, all men could vote, no women could vote. So, the 19th Amendment, women finally won their right to vote. So then we have the 24th Amendment. This is no poll tax. Do you remember I talked about the states were just a little, weren't very compliant when it came to granting African Americans the right to vote or, citizenship, equal protection, right? There's especially those southern states, what they would do is they would started putting roadblocks up where, where African Americans, it made them harder to vote. So they said, okay, so we can't tell African Americans they can't vote. So let's create a poll tax where you have to pay a tax to vote. And then that would keep African Americans from being able to vote because most African Americans were poor and they couldn't afford that poll tax. So a 24th Amendment abolished or condemned or no longer allowed those poll taxes, as in voting poll. So here's the poll tax and all these people that just don't get to vote, African American people. And so it says vote here. I love this little cartoon here. It says vote here if you can afford it. And then it says in the crowd, you see that 10 million Americans who haven't got the price. So all these people that couldn't vote because the poll tax, it just kept them out. So the 24th Amendment abolished that poll tax. Okay. Okay, then we have the let's back up, sorry. And then we have the Voting Act of 1965. The Voting Rights Act of 1965. Now, this bans voting discrimination. The 24th Amendment banned poll taxes. But this one, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, bans voting discrimination. Enforced voting right of the 14th and 15th Amendment. So citizenship, they're serious. This is like, okay, states, if you are not obeying these laws and you're still charging this poll tax, we're coming after you. Because you have got to allow African Americans the right to vote, and they get equal protection under the 14th Amendment. Minority right to vote across the country, outlaws literacy test. Literacy test, guys. This was also like the poll tax. They basically said, well, you can't vote unless you read because, you have to be able to read. Well, a lot of African Americans couldn't read. They had just came out of slavery, so not too long. No, this was 1965. I'm sorry. 1965, the Voting Rights Act outlawed literacy tests. And what it was they were trying, again, the states to, by implementing a literacy test, keep African Americans from voting. And the largest population of those that could not read was, of course, the African American population. So the Voting Rights Act of 1965 abolished outlawed literacy tests. No state or local voting qualifications. So basically, if you're a citizen, you get to vote, and you don't get to come up with any other crazy laws or hoops to jump through for African Americans to vote. So this Voting Rights Act of 1965, they meant business. So pause this video if you need to write that into your worksheet. 26th Amendment. Okay. This was during the Vietnam War. Remember the Vietnam War? What was happening during the Vietnam War? Remember selective service? Yes, that's where young men were drafted or chosen to go and fight for our country. Yes, it was during that age, during the 26th Amendment. It was 1971. This amendment was added to the Constitution. It lowered the voting age from 21 to 18. And this is why 18-year-old young men were being drafted and chosen for selective service and sent to Vietnam to fight. But they couldn't vote till they were 21. So they were old enough to lay down their lives and fight for their country and die. But they had no say-so in what was going on in that government. And so the idea is if you're old enough to die, you're old enough to vote. And so there was a rallying cry during the Vietnam War. That younger generation rising up and said, we should be able to have the right to vote at 18, not 21. And so they did. They lowered the 26th Amendment, lowered the voting age to from 21 to 18. So before Vietnam, you had to be 21 years old to vote. After this 26th Amendment, it lowered the age to now you can vote at 18. So that'd be a good little debate there. Should have been lowered? Should it not? I mean, do you have the right to die for your country? Should you have a say-so in that? That's a good debate. Okay, so which amendment defines citizenship? Which amendment defines citizenship? That's right, the 14th Amendment. Good job. Because the answer is right there, and I don't know how to take it off. So there you have it. All right, which amendment gave women the right to vote? That's right, the 19th. Was it white women or black women? That's right, it was both. And what's that called? When women vote, what is that called? When they were fighting to get the right to vote, it's called suffrage. Suffrage, women's right to vote. Good job. Which amendment gave African American men the right to vote? 15th. Good job. Which amendment said that state laws must be constitutional? State laws must be constitutional. That was the 14th. That the states had to fall in line with the Constitution. Okay, so which amendment ended slavery? That's right, 13th Amendment. Good job. Which amendment lowered the voting age to 18? That's the 26th Amendment. And what war was fought during that time? That's right, the Vietnam War. Good job. Which amendment outlawed poll tax? 24th Amendment. Which amendment said that there must be equal protection under the law? Equal protection, that was the 14th Amendment. Good job. These are important questions to know. Make sure you know them. And time's up. Thanks, guys. Make sure you fill out this worksheet. Get it turned in. Bye.